Now, when I first got the ROG Ally Xbox, I have to admit my first impressions were not that great. There's something about it that just felt like, for such an expensive console, I feel like Xbox have kind of cut a few corners. The plastic on it just felt a little bit more flimsy and hollow than I would like. And the fact that they gave you a cardboard stand, I mean, they might want to claim the sustainability card on that, but for me, it just sounds a bit cheap. It wasn't the best unboxing experience I've had. And considering when getting the ROG XBOX Ally, I had a concern that, do I really need this? I have a Steam Deck already. Is the power going to be that much more that it's going to be worth the cost of it? My initial impressions were pretty low, and I was already considering maybe I should just get a few videos out there about this and then sell it and go back to my Steam Deck. However, I hadn't delved into the actual console itself. I've not experienced the software and the games and the performance, and I've had a few days with it now, and it's started to grow on me. Now, first things first, I've had other Windows handhelds. I've had the AY and Loki, which I was really excited about when I first got it. I got the Loki Max because I believed it was going to be really powerful. I love my Steam Deck, but the idea of a Windows handheld was really exciting. I probably could count on one hand the amount of times I've used the AY and Loki, because the whole Windows experience on a gaming handheld is just underwhelming. It reminds me of the days when Windows tried to make a phone operating system, and it just didn't work. Windows is for keyboard and mouse, and it just didn't gel very well with a touchscreen. And the same thing felt like it could be said for handheld gaming consoles. Now, I don't want this to be a comparison video with the Steam Deck. I'll do a separate one, but I will say the shining aspect of the Steam Deck is the operating system and how it feels more like a console than a PC. And this is the main thing I was excited about and hoping for with the ROG XBOX Ally. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, I still feel like they've kind of cut corners. And I just feel like the whole gaming industry as a whole is starting to become a little bit sly or cheap in terms of trying to get as much money from us as possible and give us as little in terms of value. But that's a whole separate conversation. The thing I really wanted to get stuck into with the ROG XBOX Ally was the software, and to see how well Xbox have integrated their software into a Windows handheld to make it feel like an actual console as opposed to a PC. And I have to be honest, the second I actually switched on the ROG XBOX Ally and started using it, it instantly felt like a console. It felt like an Xbox console, and this was the first positive for me. Now, the Xbox Ally has obviously been created to support the Xbox ecosystem, so the first thing you will see is the Xbox Game Pass kind of gamer interface, and that's brilliant. It's really good. There's not a lot to be said that's been added by the Xbox Ally, but what I can say, as soon as you start the console, that's what you load into, and that's a nice experience that, yeah, other than maybe the login screen and a few of the steps when you first set up the console, you wouldn't necessarily know you were on a Microsoft, or you wouldn't necessarily know you're on a Windows handheld. Now, I'm going to quickly address the elephant in the room, and I don't want to go on too much about it because everyone has. I don't get like why Xbox have decided to just throw such a curveball with the cost of Game Pass. Now, I haven't purchased or used Game Pass for over about a year and a half now, because I don't really buy into the Xbox ecosystem. I barely buy into the PlayStation ecosystem anymore. It's mostly Steam. But as soon as I powered this up, I was like, right, yeah, I will do this. I will get into Game Pass. I will use Game Pass on this device as probably my second most used ecosystem beyond Steam. But I'm just not going to do it because the price is so high. And everyone said it, so I'm not going to go overly onto the point. But I just don't understand why they've released a device which is going to open up the options for Game Pass for so many people, and then made sure that Game Pass does not feel as tantalizing as it could have been. I just don't get it. It just screams even more about the video game industry just trying to get as much money as possible and not really considering the impact on the users and cutting corners. But I don't want to go on about it too much because it does take away from how much I am enjoying this console regardless of that fact and all the positives that have to be said about it. But the most important thing is that you're not forced to be in that ecosystem. It doesn't feel awkward if you want to switch over to Steam or just the Windows operating system, as you can see I've got loaded here now. The Xbox button is brilliant. You can press it and then you get your options to move over to Steam and any other apps that you've got loaded as well. And this for me is where the ROG XBOX Ally really shines. It claims itself to be a handheld where you can access and play all of your games. And now, obviously, there's limitations to that. You know, you can't play Nintendo games on it unless you go down the emulation route, which isn't for some people. But in terms of legitimately accessing video games through their intended means, I have to be honest, the Xbox Alley does a fantastic job of giving you access to as much stuff as possible and as easily as possible as well. I was worried they were going to try and force you down the Microsoft ecosystem, and they definitely present the Microsoft stuff first, but it's very easy and they don't make it difficult to get to any other kind of ecosystem or find access to games in any way that you see fit. And this is what I love about the idea of a handheld gaming PC. It gives you that freedom that you expect with a PC. And the ROG XBOX Alley hasn't taken anything away from that. Sticking with the gaming interface though, and things that are done really well and really smoothly is that if you just swipe up from the bottom of the screen, it's a lot like the Android interface where you can see all the open windows that you've got. You can scroll through them, you can close them, you can jump to them, no problem at all. And at the bottom is the option to switch to Microsoft Windows mode. And this I really, really like. With the Steam Deck, with Linux mode, it feels like you've got to switch to a different mode. It feels noticeable that SteamOS closes and Linux opens, even though Linux is running behind the scenes. Whereas on the ROG XBOX Alley, switching to Windows mode, it's just seamless. You click on it, instantly comes up. And you can switch back and forth quite easily. And once you are in Windows mode, things are equally as smooth and comfortable as you would have hoped they would have been. Like I said previously with Windows handhelds that I've used, the AY and Loki specifically, using Windows was very cumbersome and it was blatantly obvious you needed a keyboard and mouse. Now, it will be easier using a keyboard and mouse on the ROG XBOX Alley when in Windows mode, and it does miss out from having trackpads. I do wish they would introduce trackpads like the Steam Deck does. I think it would make the experience even smoother, because to navigate the mouse on Windows mode, you have to use your finger. But other than navigating the mouse in terms of clicking on certain areas and things, everything else is seamlessly integrated. Keyboards pop up whenever you would expect them. There's a few small situations where I've had to use the hotkey where you hold one of the back buttons and press up on the D-pad to bring up the keyboard. 99% of the time the keyboard comes up exactly when you would need it. Windows shifts and you can still see what you're inputting into. And these are all things that were problems on the AY and Loki and some other Windows handhelds. The Microsoft keyboard didn't come up whenever you needed it, and when it did, it was covering what you're trying to type into. And you can see that there's been a lot of work done, not just integrating Microsoft Game Pass and SteamOS onto the ROG XBOX Alley, but also making sure that Windows is comfortable to use with a controller. And honestly, I have to say, I've probably spent about 75% of my time in Windows and playing the system like that because it's so easy and so enjoyable and so smooth. And it really gives me the comfort that I have. I mean, Linux is a great operating system. There's no doubt it has benefits in certain areas, but I think the comfort of using Windows just feels so much more comfortable. I feel I can get much more done, much easier. And I've just really enjoyed exploring the ROG XBOX Alley through Windows mode and tinkering it and changing it to my preferences way more than I thought I was going to. When you want to just pick up the console and play, starting straight up into Game Pass mode and then switching over to SteamOS is fantastic. But when you want to get into tinkering, when you want to get into sorting out emulation, Windows mode is just an absolute pleasure. Now, I did also say earlier in the episode that I've obviously gone for the ROG XBOX Alley, not the ROG XBOX Alley X. Yeah, the Alley X is insanely expensive, but I probably would have pulled the trigger if I'd had the option. They just sold out instantly. So I did have concerns that it was going to be not underpowered, but not powerful enough to warrant me having it as well as a Steam Deck. But in all honesty, I have been really nicely surprised. I haven't done a huge amount of benchmarking. I'll probably do more benchmarking when I do a more specific Steam Deck versus ROG XBOX Alley video. But the thing I can say is it's definitely given me access to more video games at a smoother frame rate than the Steam Deck out of the box. And I say out of the box because the community behind the Steam Deck is fantastic. And this is something that I think will be hard to overcome for any handheld device competing with the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck has a fantastic community that has created so much amazing software that really squeezes the most out of the power of the Steam Deck. And the reason I say that is because the one game I'm going to talk about, RoboCop, out of the box, and this is how I like to do most of my comparisons, out of the box, it just doesn't load. I can't get it to start up. You see like the initial startup screen, and then it just keeps on backing out. Now I know one of my mates, Mike, Retro Gamer Boy, he's got the OLED Steam Deck, and I know he was able to just instantly start RoboCop with no tinkering whatsoever, and it was running at 15 frames per second. On the ROG XBOX Alley, starting up RoboCop started up no problem whatsoever, and I was getting between 35 to 40 frames per second. So that instantly gave me that comfortable feeling that, okay, I am going to get access to more games on this device than the Steam Deck. It is definitely worth having alongside the Steam Deck as well. Now, we'll caveat that by saying if you download certain applications on the Steam Deck, like for example the Lossless app, which enables you to run games at higher frames per second than you would natively, then you can get RoboCop to run at around about 60 frames per second, but that isn't a like-for-like fair comparison out of the box. And I haven't delved into the depths of what type of apps are available currently for the ROG XBOX Alley. But out of the box, the ROG XBOX Alley definitely gives me a significant performance boost over the Steam Deck and gives me access to more games. Moving on, emulation has been an absolute breeze as well. Now, it's been about a year and a half since I set up the Steam Deck for emulation, and in that time, things change pretty quickly, especially when it comes to like PS3 emulation. On the Steam Deck and the ROG XBOX Alley, PS2 and GameCube emulation are no problem whatsoever, that it's barely worth talking about. But PS3 emulation is where it gets interesting for me. Setting up the emulation on the ROG XBOX Alley was an absolute breeze, hugely thanks to the fact that I was working within the Windows operating system, and this is obviously more of a personal preference. If you're more familiar with Linux, you'd find that easier, but for me, working in a Windows environment just made navigating the installation process, tinkering with things, making changes, checking games and the compatibility of them was a lot easier going through the Windows operating system than it was for me going through the Linux operating system. But it does make a big difference for me, because the thing that is standing out for me about the ROG XBOX Alley is the software, and it's the software integration. And although I do have my issues with the ROG XBOX Alley, it is not perfect, and I definitely think corners were cut when it comes to the hardware side of things, or I don't want to say hardware, but in terms of the materials used. What I can say is that when I'm actually in the system, playing and gaming and enjoying it, it is an absolutely amazing experience, and I'm so happy that I got my hands on one. Now, I do think Microsoft and Xbox have done a fantastic job of the software on the ROG XBOX Alley, and it is the shining star of the device, but I will say it is not perfect though. The freedom and the easiness of jumping between ecosystems is fantastic. The user interface in terms of like swiping up and getting access to your windows, the integration of the controllers, because this obviously, I haven't even mentioned how amazing this is to hold. It's such an ergonomic console. It literally just feels like you're holding a controller with a screen on it. But it does feel like it can be a little bit janky at times. Sometimes when I feel like I've closed a program, I'm not sure if it's closed, and in the first couple of days I pressed the button a few times, but I've learned to just give it a few seconds and then see what happens, or switch into Windows mode or back. It's seamless, but the fact that this is a Windows system and it is obvious that under the surface these are all Windows that are running, jumping between them can have a few moments, I won't say moments of stutter, but can have an extra second or two where you're not sure if the system has recognized what you've done. Now, maybe that is because I've got the lower end device. Maybe the Xbox Alley X with the extra RAM might not have those issues, but I think that's primarily down to the Windows operating system. I've gone on about how much more familiar I am with Windows, how much more I prefer it, but Windows is a system that, you know, can have its own issues, can be a bit janky even on the best of PCs anyway. And that is my one concern about this device. Out the box right now, it works perfectly. It is as smooth as I would expect a Windows device to be. But my experience with Windows is that Windows systems just naturally seem to degrade and get slower over the years. And almost every device I've had at some point, I've had to format and reinstall Windows just to get the speed back. I do have that concern that over time, will that happen with this device? And I have that issue with, this isn't an Xbox ROG Alley issue. This is a concern that I have with all Windows handhelds, and something I'll only be able to know over the years. You could argue that by the time it happens, new systems will be out and this will be out of date. However, I'm treating this as a console, and just like all my consoles, I expect them to still be available and to still work 10, 15, 20 years down the line. But, you know, just hypothesizing now, we'll have to see how that goes. That's just a concern that I have in the back of my mind. Other than that though, to put it in a nutshell, when I got the Xbox Alley out of the box, I was a bit disappointed. As soon as I turned it on, it completely changed my perspective. The smoothness of integration of the software, the power of the console exceeded what I thought I was going to find. The ergonomic grips, the battery life, which I haven't even gone into, the battery life is just fantastic. Everything about it has completely won me over, and I have to be honest, I'm a positive guy when it comes to these handhelds. Anyone who watches the channel, and even my mates in the Retro Refresh crew, always go on like, oh, Stab always thinks everything's great, and I always come from the perspective of looking for the best in things. With this device, I have to say, this had an uphill struggle. I didn't want to spend the money on it. I didn't necessarily think I needed it beyond the Steam Deck. When I got it out of the box, I felt like corners were cut, and I just thought a cardboard stand is just like an insult. And I was instantly thinking of, okay, what's going to be the easiest way to sell this and not lose too much money? It had an uphill struggle, and literally since I got into the device and started using it, I started to get impressed. And every moment I've spent with it over the past few days, everything I've been doing with it has been enjoyable, has been successful, especially when it comes to the emulation, and it is bit by bit won me over. And I have to admit, using this device just in and of itself is fun and enjoyable, even when I'm not playing the games. And I think I have to say that has to be down to how much of an amazing job that Xbox and Asus have done at integrating Windows into a handheld gaming console. For me, this is a handheld gaming console, not a handheld gaming PC. I know technically it's a PC, but it feels like I'm picking up a console and just having as much fun as I would have with a brand new console. And it's the most fun I've had with an Xbox since the Xbox 360. Never got an Xbox One, got the Xbox Series S, enjoyed it for a bit. For me, I'd pretty much just written off Xbox, if I'm being honest. And this has kind of brought it back for me a bit now. If you want to get your hands on one, the links will be in the description below. But if you want to check out the Steam Deck or the AY and Loki Max that I was referring to, then check out this video right here.